Look, I'm all in favor of Sydney Sweeney having a moment. She is one of the rising stars in Hollywood, and that is great for her. But what I find fascinating and honestly kind of worrying is how much is projected onto her. Today on the podcast, what has Sydney Sweeney come to represent? The group chat is here. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, right now, Sydney Sweeney is really having a moment. She's got on people's radar from Euphoria, but also the first season of The White Lotus. But in the last year or so, she's just been about everywhere. She's had a big rom-com called Anyone But You. She was in Madam Web, which I'm told nobody saw it, but everyone hated it. She hosted SNL, and then she's also got a new movie that just dropped this week. It's called Immaculate. That opens in theaters on Friday. And while we have been in this peak Sydney Sweeney moment, there's also been a steady, nonstop stream of think pieces about her, about why she's just different, about her body, like way too much writing about her body, including multiple pieces about why her breasts signal the return of an era gone by. Yikes. But also about how she's a magnet for the right wing, why she's personally, herself, the very manifestation of the end of wokeness. People are going a little bit nuts, which raises a bigger question, which is why is it so hard for people to just be normal about Sydney Sweeney? We're going to get into all of this with two people who spend a fair bit of time thinking about what she represents. Kelsey McKinney hosts the incredible podcast No More Gossip. She writes for Defector. She's here for the first time. Tayo Barrow is back. You know Tayo. She's a regular here. She's a columnist with The Guardian. Tayo, Kelsey, welcome to Commotion, y'all. Good morning. How's it going?
Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to do this. I'm also just want to begin with a note of gratitude, which is thanks to both of you for just writing with normality about Sydney Sweeney while the internet sort of insists on just a lot of weird stuff, a lot of focus on just her body, her image. We'll get into all of this. Tayo, maybe we'll begin with this idea of Sydney Sweeney leaning into stereotypes about her. You know, it's really in all the publicity leading up to this release. Here she is on Saturday Night Live talking about her new movie, Immaculate.
I play a nun, so it's perfect casting. But tonight, I'm excited for everyone to get to know the real me. I feel like people only see me as the girl on TV who screams, cries, and has sex. Sometimes it's all three at the same time. But I'm more than that. I'm from a town called Spokane, right on the border of Washington and Idaho. I feel a bond to both states. Like when people ask, where are you from? I say Washington. But when people ask, did you go to a Trump-themed party for your mom? I say, Idaho.
Okay, if you missed that last reference, it wasn't just a corny joke, okay? It was about that time that she posted these photos from her mom's 60th birthday party, and then some people were wearing MAGA hats at that party. Tayo, would you remind us what happened back then?
Absolutely. So she threw this 60th birthday party for her mom, invited a bunch of her mom's friends from around the country. And a bunch of them showed up in red hats that looked like in photos, like MAGA hats. And I think there was also some Blue Lives Matter merch, sprinkled in there as well.
Sure.
And so a lot of people, of course, you know, as we expected, were pretty upset to see that. She came back and said that it was actually, the message on the hats was actually make 60 great again or something of the sort. But of course, you can imagine, you know, the MAGA hats signal something very specific about a very specific political leaning in this country and the ideas that come along with it. So people were, as expected, very unhappy.
Tayo, I wanted to start there with that moment because to me that felt like the beginning of Sydney Sweeney herself being a sort of political statement, or at least like some kind of canvas for people to sort of project some anxieties. Would you say that that's roughly where it begins for her?
Yes and no. So I think in some ways, yes, because this was the first time I think she was forced to really confront her personal politics and also deal with the backlash directly. But I think in some other ways, we've also been talking about Sydney Sweeney's body for a very long time. And this goes back to Euphoria days. And we've been having conversations about her appearance and how her appearance has shaped her experiences in Hollywood and the power and agency that she has or doesn't have over her own image. So I think it's a little bit of a mix of both, but I think that really just took it up a notch as far as the big P politics of things.
Well, Kelsey, you have this great line in your Defector piece where you write, "The personal is political, as they say, but in a situation like this, it is easy to see how quickly one person's personal can be extrapolated into someone else's politics." Why is she such an easy canvas, you think, for people to project their own politics onto?
I think, not to invoke a dark lord here, but I do think that you can't really talk about Sydney Sweeney right now without looking at Taylor Swift's career.
Yeah.
And here you have this young, frankly, bombshell, right? She's the first bombshell that blonde bombshell Hollywood has had in decades.
Sure.
And she's out here and she's very, very quiet. Whenever anyone has any questions for her about politics, she manages to defer them in a way that is very smart for making money and a little questionable in terms of what do you actually believe as a person.
Sure.
And so I think part of the reason that people are able to project the things that they believe onto her is that she's been kind of quiet, right? If you look at another blonde with a similar body type that's pretty popular, has also hosted Saturday Night Live recently, and Renee Rapp, you don't see the same kind of projection on her because one, she's out as lesbian, and two, she's very clear about what she believes.
Her politics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess I'm interested in the idea of Sydney Sweeney because when she was on The White Lotus, I remember a flurry of pieces of being this is exactly the kind of teen you should fear. She plays these characters that are a little bit menacing, a little bit misunderstood. And actually, I think she kind of plays them really smartly. I think she's actually really talented at playing these kinds of characters that are, in one sense, they're quite powerless. In other senses, they're quite powerful. What do you make of the career choices that she's made so far that are in conversation with the way that she's thought of?
I think that she is making a lot of career choices to set herself up for success down the line. I think part of the reason she's quiet politically is that she wants these kind of big roles that she doesn't think she's going to get without them, right? Yeah. So a great example of this is Madam Web, which I did see in theaters and is as bad as everyone says it is. And Sydney Sweeney, plays this kind of demure, scared high school girl who they have dressed like she's a Catholic schoolgirl, truly soft porn outfit. She looks insane the whole movie. Sure. And watching it, you think here's a really talented young actress with tons of great roles. Why would she agree to do this? And she said, well, it puts my foot in the door with Sony, which is a huge corporation, and getting in with them allows me to do things down the line that I might want to do. So I think she's very strategic in her career.
I'm glad you brought that up because she is someone who's been very public about how strategic she's been in her career. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. Tayo, I want to talk about the weird stuff on the internet, man. And I keep saying weird, but I really mean just kind of it's just a kind of writing that I haven't seen on the internet for some time and is now kind of resurfacing in mainstream publications. So we have this op-ed in the National Post. It claims that Sydney Sweeney represents a threat to wokeness, specifically that her breasts are, quote, double D harbingers of the death of woke. You heard about this piece. Why did you think it was worth writing about? Why did you think, this needs some kind of countering?
Well, let me first say I took no joy in having to cover this.
Sure, I get that.
But I thought it was important to talk about because I think it's such a good reflection of this really weird, demented moment that we're in culturally where, and I talk about this in the piece, there's this convergence of conservative pushback against quote wokeness, but also this desire to kind of elevate this specific kind of womanhood that Sydney Sweeney represents, which is blonde, beautiful, big-breasted, and as I kind of talk about in the piece as well, willing to kind of play to those stereotypes, even if she's just poking fun at herself, right? So I think this moment in this conversation was important to have because it really brought together all of those different things that we've been seeing throughout the culture in different spaces.
Kelsey, what's your take on this? What's your take on why that discourse popped up? I should say it was not just the National Post. The Spectator had a similar piece that was along the same lines. This has been written about maybe too frequently in the last little while.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to try and put myself into the mind palace of where these people are writing these columns from. That seems like a really
that's a good idea.
Dangerous choice on my part. But I do think, Sydney Sweeney is everywhere. She works really hard and she works all the time. Like, how many actresses can you say right now, oh, she's in Madam Web, it's still in theaters. She's in Anyone But You, which is a big blockbuster rom-com that was out this year. And she has Immaculate coming out, right? Like, you can't get her name out of your mouth.
That's
like,
3 movies in like
everywhere.
4 months. Like, that's like pretty massive. Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it. And I think, I think Teo's right that a lot of this comes down to the fact that like people can project upon her.
Mm-hmm.
She's beautiful and she's quiet. And so it's like, well, we'll just say what we want to say about her. And then we'll use her as one of our own. And I think that happens more frequently with Sydney Sweeney because right now the American right does not have a good celebrity. Like, they don't have one celebrity in Hollywood. Like, every celebrity is kind of coming out and saying, like, we disagree with your terrible and hateful beliefs. Like, we don't want any part of this. And Sydney Sweeney is their new Taylor Swift. It's like, well, she's quiet enough. We can have her as ours, maybe. And like, I don't think they'll get to keep her. She hasn't really said anything politically yet, but I assume she will eventually. So it's like they needed somebody to fill that slot. And here is a white blonde woman who's very hot. So like, why not her?
I should clarify the thing that you just said, which is like this idea that for a little while, the American right sort of had Taylor Swift to project a lot of ideas onto, because Taylor Swift sort of famously was someone who avoided talking about politics. And there are like, well-documented sort of like large, think pieces about the idea that like she's avoiding talking about politics because she's actually a conservative person who represents a lot of these ideas. And then eventually Taylor would kind of come out and go like, you know what, but leave me out of it. Like, none of this is my business. And you're right. We have not really had another celebrity to fill that space and then enter Sydney Sweeney. Kelsey, I want to talk about a piece that you wrote a little while ago, because she's been very open about her need for hustle, right? Like, and that's unusual in Hollywood. She's someone who will do branded content. If you go to her Instagram, you'll see brand collaborations like every other post. Like that, it's kind of a relatively frequent thing for her to do. But she's kind of talked explicitly about how, you know what, if I only took these acting roles, I would not be able to afford the life that I have in LA. My parents took this chance on me, and I'm the person who has to go out and make the money for my family. And I guess like what she's getting at is this obscure thing in Hollywood, which is that so many people in Hollywood are the children of famous people. They do not have to like act. It's nice for them to do so. It's pocket money. It is not the case for Sydney Sweeney. Can you talk a little bit about how that revealed the dynamic in Hollywood?
Sure. Yeah. There's been a lot of discourse about like nepotism and nepo babies in the last couple of years. And Sydney Sweeney gave this interview almost a year and a half ago now, where she said, I couldn't take 6 months off acting if I wanted to. And people pulled this quote out of context and freaked out about it. Yeah. And they were like, well, nobody could take 6 months off work, ignoring the fact that she was talking about wanting to become a mother, right? Wanting one day to have a child that would need her to take time off work. Yeah. And so she's been kind of open and honest about the fact that Hollywood is not a place that is actually supportive financially of actresses and actors in their careers. Yeah. It's the kind of place that like you need family money to make it work. And if you don't have family money, then you have to do, ads for Drink Buy or whatever it is that she's doing ads for now. And I think that is kind of reflective of a larger problem in Hollywood, which is that the money is kind of sitting at the very top of these pyramids. Yes. You have the heads of these corporations, the heads of Sony and Paramount and all of these giant companies taking home millions and millions of dollars. And they're not hundreds of millions of dollars in most of their cases. And they're not making the movies that you're watching, right? They're not creating the Instagrams that you want to scroll through on your phone, right? That's actors. And so I think she has been pretty revealing of the fact that like the money is not coming to her. And so even though she is rich compared to the rest of Americans, she is not rich in comparison to the amount of money she makes for these companies.
See, like, I find that conversation useful because she has actually herself become a mouthpiece for this. So you can hear her speaking in her own words about it. But then also this larger idea of there's an imbalance in Hollywood in terms of who's doing the labor and who's doing the profiting. And she is as explicit as it can get about that. Tayo, she is producing. She's one of the producers of this new movie, Immaculate, that's in theaters right now. The critical reception, we should say, has been kind of mid. Do you expect Immaculate to like change the trajectory of her career in any way?
I don't think so. I think she put a lot of, and she's talked a lot about the work that she put into like getting Immaculate made.
Yeah.
And even if you look at, her work like this past year, right? She's done her big three. She's got the big horror flick, Immaculate. She's done her big rom-com. And then of course there's Madam Web, right? And all of this is
hitting all quadrants. Yes.
She's hitting all the quadrants. And all of this, let's not forget, is coming off the back of her run on a prestige TV show that was the biggest thing on TV when it was on the air. And this is The White Lotus. So I think she's making moves. And as Kelsey kind of mentioned before, she's making moves that are going to set her up in the long run for success without necessarily needing each of them to be her magnum opus.
You know what we've done, guys, is we've managed to have a normal conversation about Sydney Sweeney's trajectory without getting
Imagine that.
We imagine that. It turns out it was entirely possible. Kelsey, Taya, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for being here.
Always good to talk to you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Kelsey McKinney is a journalist who writes for Defector. She hosts the incredible podcast Normal Gossip. Taya Barrow is a freelance writer. You can read her piece on Sydney Sweeney in The Guardian. She was here in Toronto. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. All right, look, if you are a fan of superheroes, then you probably already know that the last couple of years have been a bit of a mixed bag, right? Like, there are wins, but honestly, they're far and few in between. It's been a lot of superhero flops in TV and in movies, but every once in a while, you get a release that is not in the Marvel or DC universe that gets love from fans and critics. Case in point is the animated series Invincible.
I'm nothing like my dad. I want to be just like you.
I fought to keep this planet safe. Your power's got to be due any day now, son.
You need to be better. After everything he's done, how can I live up to all that?
You need to decide what kind of hero you want to be.
Part 2 of this season of Invincible just came out on Amazon Prime Video. Rachel Ho is a huge fan, and I'm a huge fan of Rachel Ho. Rachel, what's good, homie? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. How you doing?
I'm good, dude. Listen, let's talk about Invincible. What is the premise of the show?
So it's anti-superhero. It falls in line with like The Boys, Gen V. We got Mark Grayson. He's a senior in high school. His dad is Omni-Man, which is basically their world's Superman. Once Mark gets his powers, it unravels some family secrets, a whole mess of trouble for Earth. Things happen. I'm just going to say things happen. And it gets violent. It gets funny. It gets dark, but it's great.
The idea that things happen is such an understatement. It's not even funny. I started watching Invincible on your recommendation. On like the idea, like we're doing this. I was like, all right, let's get into it. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But I mentioned that you're a big fan of the show. What's one thing that you think Invincible is doing that other shows are not really doing? Because it is this animated superhero series. A lot of these are not getting as much love as they maybe should be.
I think so. The anti-superhero genre has come up, and I think it's kind of held up a mirror against like what can power do? How can it corrupt people? Yeah. But I do think that shows like The Boys and Gen V, they take a very one-dimensional approach to it. They just basically say power corrupts.
Yeah.
That's it, like groundbreaking. But Invincible to
huge
me,
of
though,
true. Yes.
Yeah, I know. Like who would have thought? But Invincible to me, though, it takes a more well-rounded approach. It takes a more four-dimensional approach to what happens when someone has power. Even if you're a good person, like what can happen with the best of intentions? It still doesn't work out all the time. And that's a lot of Adam Eve's story, and that's one of my favorite bits. But I think it just is it's a very well-rounded, all-encompassing look at what superheroes really would look like in real life.
What I like about the show is that it distorts your moral compass really early, right? Like you sort of get introduced to these characters and they're set up and it's like, hey, these appear to be the good guys, right? Everybody can agree. And then by the end of the first episode, you're a little bit lost at sea. You're a little bit like, actually, I don't know what is up and what is down. I don't know who is good or bad anymore. Let's talk about the style of animation, because like that is not a moral that I expect in an 80s or 90s cartoon. This is animated like one of those guys. Like, this is animated like an 80s or 90s sort of Sunday cartoon feel. And here's the thing. I feel like some critics have argued that the quality of animation doesn't actually quite match the larger story being told here. What do you think about that idea?
It's fair. I think especially in the first season, I think that was a really fair critique because it didn't look as good, especially if you compare it to the other stuff that was coming out, like in terms of animation. It didn't look as good. It looked a little bit pedestrian, possibly a little bit rushed. I think COVID might have had something to do with that. It was a lot of disruptions at that time. So I think it's fair, but I do think in season 2, they have improved. I think they've gone up. They have taken that 80s, 90s aesthetic still. It's still there and it's still flat, which some people might inherently just have a problem with. Yeah. But if you grew up with it, I mean, I think it looks pretty good now.
Not only does it look good, I feel both nostalgic and being introduced to new ideas because it is sort of using that 80s, 90s cartoon style and going to a different place. I should say, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s and you watch all those Sunday cartoons, you might be expecting that. And then you get to a certain level of blood and guts that you get in the show that is like, oh, no, we're definitely in like adult watching territory. Do you think the balance of the gore and the story work? Because there's a lot of gore, we should say.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But to me, it's one of the best things about the show. Like you said, if you grew up in the 80s and the 90s and you watched X-Men, if you watched Spider-Man, Batman, the animated series, like we were children when those came out. And now we're grown adults and we can take a little bit of violence. We can take a little bit of the brutality and how gory it is. But I think that contrast is what makes it's so jarring. You know, you talk about the first episode. Once you get right to the end of that episode, then that's when it twists. That's when you get it. Yeah. But I think it's the contradiction that makes it work so well.
You mentioned the scene at the end of the first episode. It's sort of the scene that sets the bar for the level of gore you can expect from the show. It is probably one of the goriest things I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years or so, and it is entirely animated. It's an interesting moment, I think, for the superhero genre, right? On the one hand, you got these big players like Marvel and DC that have been struggling, to put it mildly, at the box office. You know, they're struggling with critics as well. And then you talked about The Boys and the spinoff Gen V, but also you got movies like Across the Spider-Verse. You got a couple of franchises that are like, hey, what we need is actually an irreverent take on superheroes. Where do you see Invincible sitting in that conversation? The idea that, you know what, we need to sort of play around with what the superhero has come to represent.
For me, it's like top tier, S tier. It's right up there.
Top tier.
I think it is one of the best things that is out there in the superhero genre. And not because everyone else is floundering. Like, I think that this is just strong storytelling. The character development is out of this world. It is far better than anything that any of the other guys have done. And one thing I like that it brings it back to its origins as an animated show. Like, comic books are animation. That's inherently the form. That's the art form of it. And when you bring it into animation, the possibilities are endless. Then you can do whatever you want. You can make it gory, you can make it bloody, and The Boys has done that, but it can look a little bit campy at times because it's live action, and so running through a human being, it can only look so realistic in real world. But put it in animation, like, my God, it gets so gory. Like, you talk about the first episode being one of the goriest things you've seen. I just watched the latest episode from the second season. My goodness.
Even more.
It's rough. Like, and it plays with your imagination too, because you just think, good, like, what would that be like if you were that was you? Like, that was very disturbing.
I'm grateful for you and grateful for getting a chance to be introduced to the show because, the thing with superhero as a genre is that, like, you blink and you suddenly wake up and realize 2008 was when Iron Man came out. We have been in a superhero moment for 15 years, and very, very recently did we start to critique the overarching, hegemony of the superhero as a figure that defines our time. The idea that we've been in the superhero era for such a long time, and now we're getting really valid and valuable critiques of this genre. I really appreciate. Rachel, thank you for your time, pal. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Elamin. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Rachel Ho is a film critic at Exclaim Magazine. You can catch new episodes of Season 2 of Invincible on Amazon Prime Video right now. Listen, I'm going to be watching it. I'm going to be watching it all the way from Season 1 to the rest of it. That is it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to the show anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about a brand new documentary that reckons with the world of child stars, particularly Nickelodeon child stars. We can also find us on Instagram. We are at Commotion CBC. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. I'm going to be back tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye.